Hello, and welcome back. These videos follow the development journey for Penumbra Tower, a grid-based roguelike where the player has to navigate through randomly generated floors of the Penumbra Tower, defeating enemies and traveling deeper within. And yes, I've finally named a game. Those of you who watched the devlogs for the previous game know that throughout all of the videos I never came up with a name, so let me know what you guys think. In the previous devlog, we implemented our grid script to start generating our room of tiles. We created a unit manager to spawn both the player and enemies onto those random tiles, got the movement working in the player controller script, and started working on the combat script. But enough about the previous devlog, let's jump into the project. Before we get started, let's do something about this grid. It's pretty ugly and makes this game look like we're playing checkers. I switched the square tiles for a rounded version. And then I chose some colors from a color palette that looks closer to something like a cave or a dungeon. And here's how it looks now. I also added a mouse over highlight for the tiles. It's also important to note here that this change is also just placeholder for now, and I'll start working on an actual tile map in the future. And before I get into what I've done on the combat script, I think we should add in some better sprites into the game. Just as a placeholder for now, I'm using the rat sprite from the previous game. I know from the previous devlogs that everybody loved the rat sprite, so if you guys want the rat sprite to be a permanent addition, let me know in the comments. Okay, so onto the player sprite. I may have ran into a little bit of trouble here. I really liked the frog from the previous games, but I didn't want to use the same player sprite, so I tried something different while keeping the frog theme. I wanted the player to have a large backpack, almost like a traveling merchant or something. And here's how it turned out. Just kidding, this was just the first attempt. I didn't really like how this one turned out. I felt like it looked a little strange. I didn't really like how the frog turned out, and I felt like the backpack was also too large. After this, I decided to move away from the frog theme while keeping the backpack. This new version was closer to something like a black mage from Final Fantasy. But in the end, I decided I wasn't happy with this idea either and started working on a third version, and switched back to the frog idea. So yeah, player sprite done. I really don't want to have to draw sprites anymore, at least for a while, as I'm not the best at using a drawing tablet, so this definitely takes me a while to do. And let me know in the comments what you think of this player sprite, or if you liked one of the other versions more. So let's check how these sprites look in Unity. And here we are. Honestly, I'm pretty happy with how the player sprite turned out. Moving away from design, the player can move around right now, but our enemies cannot. So I started working on an enemy AI script. So pretty much what this script is doing is inside of this brain method we're checking if the player is in range, call the attack method. If the player is not in range, call the movement method. Now I tried my best, but the movement method is pretty messed up, but I'll try my best to explain. Essentially, a list of tiles is being created based on whatever tiles are in range of the enemy. The method then loops through those tiles and returns whichever tile has the closest vector 3 position to the player. Then, in the interact with movement script, we take that closest tile, check if we can walk on it, and then use the set unit to tile method from the previous devlog. And that's pretty much it. But you know, I was thinking, remember that coroutine script I wrote to lerp the unit position to the tiles position? What I realized was, I was going to have to rewrite another coroutine for the attack script, and then another coroutine for any other action that I wanted to do. And I was thinking, what the hell am I doing? So after some quick googling, I set up DOTween. And man, it is just so much easier to use. I mean, just look, I was able to replace that entire coroutine with just a transform line. It's crazy. So now, if we jump into Unity, we can see the enemy movement is working properly. Well, kind of properly. Because there's no logic for whose turn it is right now, the enemies move across the board towards the player instantly. To To resolve this issue, inside of the Game Manager's switch statement, I added an enemy behavior method and made sure to switch back and forth between the player and enemy turns respectively. So now, every time I click a tile, the player moves, and then directly after, the enemy takes their turn, and then they wait for the player to move again. There's way more code that I'm not going to go over to get this to work, mainly to do with wait times and looping through each enemy so they don't just all move at once, but it's not too important. Now, one last thing before we get into combat. We need a health script for all of our units. For now, this is mainly a way for the units to take damage. I've set up this method that subtracts damage from the unit's current health. I've also added a slight knockback animation using DOTween, and the take damage invoke damage line is actually a Unity event that is instantiating a damage pop-up number in the UI. It looks something like this. And the fighter script is relatively similar to the health script. First, we get the target's health component, and then we call the take damage method. I've also set up an attack animation using DOTween. It's pretty similar to the movement animation, except that this animation uses yo-yo to revert back to its origin position. Okay, so far we've covered a bunch of individual pieces that fit into the core gameplay loop. Let's run the game in Unity and see how they fit together. Yep, everything seems to be working at least. Now we have movement and combat for the player and enemies. Although it may be basic, it's a good first step. There's still a ton of work that needs to be done regarding the grid generation, tile behavior, and many things to make the movement and combat less boring. What do you guys think of the game so far? I think it looks a lot better than it did in the first devlog, and you can probably get a better idea of where this game is headed. I know I skim over the code kind of quickly and it appears like it's working right away, but most of the time these updates take days for me to figure out why something isn't working properly. I just wanted to add this in at the end. I'm not some sort of C# savant, I'm actually pretty slow, and this is by no means a tutorial on how you should be developing a game. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. Only 15% of you are subscribed. And yeah, I'll see you in the next devlog.